Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton dominated the primary contests in the Northeast, while distant second in the GOP race, Ted Cruz, chose a running mate. Radio talk show host and editor-in-chief at LifeZette, Laura Ingraham, and senior editor of The Atlantic, David Frum, join me to discuss it all. And later, the Islamic terror group Boko Haram's assault on Christians in Nigeria rages on. Bishop Matthew Kukaah of northern Nigeria is here. He'll update us on the condition of his people and the hope beyond the terror. And finally, Pope Francis has called all of us to be a more missionary people. What does that mean? Jesuit columnist and author Sean SALAI is here to talk about his new book, What Would Pope Francis Do? If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. You can find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@EWTN.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. It was another incredible topsy-turvy week in the race for president, a day after Donald Trump dominated the headlines and the primaries in 5 northeastern states. Ted Cruz chose former presidential candidate Carly Fiorina as his running presidential mate, or vice presidential mate. The bold move, or desperate measure, as some have called it, was an attempt to upstage the momentum of the Trump campaign. After Trump's primary sweep on Tuesday, Cruz was in fact mathematically eliminated from being able to secure an outright victory prior to the GOP convention. And on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders is not going quietly into the night after Hillary Clinton bested him in 4 of the 5 primaries on Tuesday. Still flush with cash, Sanders says he will fight on and he's in the campaign to win. However, his national campaign is laying off hundreds of staffers and will focus its attention on getting a big win in California come June. More on this crazy week on the campaign trail in our next segment. And President Barack Obama has vowed to help stop illegal immigration in Europe. During meetings this week with the G5 countries, which also include the UK, Germany, Italy, France, Obama pledged the U.S.'s support in helping Europe with its migration crisis, calling it an economic and security issue that could adversely affect the United States. According to Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Obama said he was willing to commit NATO assets to blocking the flow of migrants from crossing the Mediterranean into Italy and the Aegean Sea into Greece. And civilian deaths resulting from Boko Haram attacks in Nigeria increased dramatically in 2015, according to a new report by the London-based charitable organization Action on Armed Violence. Fatalities and injuries are up 190% from the previous year. In the same period, the incidence of suicide bombings by the Islamist group rose by 167%. The new figures coincided with a warning by the Nigerian government that Boko Haram has sabotaged crops in rural northeast Nigeria with landmines. Nigeria now ranks 4th in the world for deaths and injuries attributed to explosive weapons, ranking behind Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, but ahead of Afghanistan. More about Nigeria later in the program. And the Islamic State is continuing the destruction of Christian heritage sites across its self-declared caliphate. This week in Mosul, Iraq, the terror group destroyed a landmark Church of the Miraculous Virgin, known as the Clock Church, as its clock tower can be seen and its chimes heard for miles. It was razed by explosives after Islamist troops evacuated the surrounding area. The church had already been looted last year. The Clock Church was built in 1873 as a gift to the Dominican friars in Mosul from Empress Eugenie, the wife of Napoleon III. Mosul has been under ISIS control since June of 2014. And Chinese President Xi Jinping is warning against nefarious religious influences from abroad. He made the comments at a conference on religions over the weekend in Beijing. Xi insisted that religious groups must submit to the ruling Communist Party's control and stressed that in no way should religions interfere with government administration, judiciary, or education. During the past 2 years, communist authorities have demolished thousands of crosses atop church buildings and destroyed other Christian symbols. Over the weekend, retired Bishop of Hong Kong, Cardinal Joseph Zen, led a protest calling public attention to the persecution of Christians and the imprisonment of their leaders. And we're very sad to report that Harry Wu, a Chinese dissident who endured 19 years of captivity in communist China's Laogai, the forced labor camps, died this week while vacationing in Honduras. Wu led an international campaign to expose the horrors of those camps by founding the Laogai Research Foundation. He appeared on this show several times. He was 79 years old. In a related story, the waters of Rome's famous Trevi Fountain flowed red on Thursday. It was a gesture to Christian martyrs and to all persecuted Christians. The international Catholic charity Aid to the Church in Need staged the event at one of Rome's busiest tourist attractions. The group hopes to call attention to the tragedy of anti-Christian persecution and the systematic violation of the rights to religious freedom, especially those of Christians. And they hope that this would create a public debate around this important issue. And the Vatican's financial watchdog reported on Thursday a nearly fourfold increase in the number of suspicious transactions it investigated last year. Remarkably, the Vatican says this is progress. René Brulhart, head of the Vatican's Financial Information Agency, said that the sharp rise in investigations is a sign of tighter scrutiny rather than an increase in questionable activity. The Vatican has beefed up efforts in recent years to flag potential tax cheats who are using the Vatican Bank to hide money. In all, 544 transactions warranted inquiries in 2015. Meanwhile, the Pope made a surprise visit to the Vatican Economic Secretariat on Thursday. This in the wake of a suspended independent audit of the Vatican by American accounting firm Price Waterhouse. Vatican watchers see the move as a sign of opposition to Cardinal George Pell's efforts to reform and make transparent the Vatican's economic practices. And finally, Cardinal Jaime Ortega of Havana, Cuba, retired this week. Pope Francis accepted the 79-year-old cardinal's resignation on Tuesday. Cardinal Ortega was appointed Archbishop of Havana by Pope John Paul II in 1981. During his tenure, he quietly established the Roman Catholic Church as practically the only government-independent institution with any influence on the island. Cuba is 60% Catholic. Ortega oversaw 3 papal visits to the communist nation, and a couple of years ago, he played an important role in the reestablishment of diplomatic relations between the United States and Cuba when he carried a Vatican letter to President Barack Obama. Archbishop Juan Garcia Rodriguez has been appointed as the cardinal's successor. We hope he has a wonderful retirement. He certainly earned it. Finally, I got a fantastic, wonderful video. It's kind of a question from a viewer this week. A reader of my book for young readers, Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls. Watch this.
Hi, Mr. Arroyo. I'm Trinity Went, and I'm a huge fan of your books. I would like to know where you got the inspiration for your book and when your next book is coming out.
Ah, Trinity, thank you for reading Will Wilder's first adventure. The next book in the series premieres in March of 2017. Now, you asked me where I got the inspiration. As some of you who watch the show know, there was a relic that went missing in an Irish church I was visiting in the summer a few years ago, and that was kind of the germ of the idea. The rest of it came from observing kids, talking to a lot of librarians, my own life, and things I encountered along the way. So thank you for the question, Trinity. If you haven't read Will's Adventure, I hope you do. The summer is a perfect time to lose yourself in a rollicking adventure. It's been amazing for me to get to know so many of you. And I'm not finished yet. I'll be in Birmingham at the Books A Million in Brookwood on May 11th, signing books, and in Atlanta, Georgia, in Roswell, actually, on May 22nd. All the details are at RaymondArroyo.com, and Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls, is available at the EWTN Religious Catalog and at bookstores everywhere. Don't miss the fun. Adults and kids are enjoying it. When we return, Donald Trump's momentum continues to build after sweeping 5 GOP state primaries this week. Can Ted Cruz and John Kasich pose a realistic challenge? And what about Bernie and Hillary? Laura Ingraham and David Frum will tell us when the world over continues. Stay right there.
I consider myself the presumptive nominee, absolutely.
I started off with 17. I'm down now. I'm winning it. It's over. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. These two guys cannot win. There's no path.
That was Donald Trump celebrating a sweep of victories in the Northeast, breaking well above 50% and exceeding expectations in every state. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton is close to securing her party's nomination, yet Bernie Sanders says he's determined to go all the way to the end. Here to give us their take on the state of this wild and woolly race, our radio talk show host and editor-in-chief of Life's Ed, Laura Ingraham, and senior editor of The Atlantic and chairman of Policy Exchange, David Frum. Thank you both for being here. I'm delighted you could come along, and I'll just wave to you, David. My arm's not that long. Look, after Trump's victory, and we saw 54% in Maryland, 57% in Pennsylvania, 64% in Rhode Island, is this the end? I mean, could this be an outright win before the convention, the much-touted, brokered convention?
It's a pretty steep climb for Ted Cruz at this point. It's mathematically impossible at the convention that Ted Cruz could maybe have turned enough delegates to win this on a second or third ballot, but I don't know. I just think I mean, they had trouble securing a deal with John Kasich. I mean, I'm not all that convinced that Ted Cruz has 1,237 committed right now. They're going to die on the hill of Ted Cruz at that convention. If he can't secure the deal with Kasich, that thing fell apart as soon as it was made. It's kind of hard to see that they can really rely on 1,237 delegates at the convention. And even if that did happen, I think you'd see such a fractured party. Hillary would, without a doubt, win. David, from A, did you ever think we'd be here? And B, is it possible for anyone other than Trump to take this nomination, considering the large number of delegates he's racking up, even if he's beneath that 1,237 threshold?
No, to the first question. And yes, but faintly yes to the second. Okay. The problem with the plan to stop Donald Trump was it was always too complicated. It has been clear for now for some weeks that there was one plan to stop Donald Trump, and that was for everyone in the Republican Party to swallow whatever objections they might have and rally around the second-place candidate, Ted Cruz. But the actual plan that the party had, many people in the party had, was to give Cruz just enough support to stop Trump, and then at the convention to insert somebody else, a third person or a fourth person, because we would get to the convention with probably Trump in first place, Cruz in second place, Kasich maybe in third, Marco Rubio in fourth, and then some, and it was just always
some magical figure on a white horse.
Well, we know it wasn't so magical. We know who it was, but it was too complicated, and it was too in bad faith that if the party wanted to stop Donald Trump, it had to stop him by rallying around Ted Cruz. That was the choice, whether they liked it or not. And too many didn't like it, and so Trump is the likeliest outcome at this point.
Okay, I have to show you this because it seems...
I have one question. Where's Marco Rubio? Has anyone seen him? I mean, is he in the witness protection program?
Apparently,
he endorses Ted Cruz.
And he's in absentia.
Wait a second. We got this Latino population in California. I must have missed all those speeches that Rubio was doing, and Bush, Mr. Amnesty. Where are all these speeches?
Why do you think he's so quiet these days, Marco?
Because Marco Rubio's probably thinking that Trump's going to lose, and they're preparing to run Rubio again in 2020. Jeb's, I don't think at that point probably going to run, but Marco would probably run again. And otherwise, if Trump is the big threat to the country and the world, why wouldn't they all be, as David said, out there working for Cruz? The conservatives never unified around one alternative.
That's exactly right.
They needed one alternative. If I heard one more time our friend Bill Kristol say the more the merrier, or George Will, all these people are like, the more the merrier in the race. I kept saying, why is it the more the merrier? You need one alternative to, at that time I thought the establishment candidate. To the establishment candidate, that was before Trump got in. But then once they wanted to kill off Trump, you can't kill him off with 10 people.
Look, I'm probably the biggest rhino squish ever to sit in this chair. Okay, so I'm for universal health.
It's an endangered species,
It's an
by the way.
endangered species.
After Trump, endangered.
But well, no, because actually, well, that's a complicated question. Is he or isn't he? But the point was, I was saying, you need to that people, if you don't want Trump, people of all points of view need to swallow their they need to be disciplined. I mean, politics is not a place for expressive theater. It is not a place where you get your wishes granted.
Somebody better tell Donald Trump that. He's been running expressive theater for months.
You're always choosing the lesser evil, the lesser evil, the lesser evil. And so there's a lot about Ted Cruz that doesn't appeal to me. But if the alternative has been clear for a long time, Cruz, Trump. And for me, the choice was Cruz. And yet people who are much closer to him, ideologically, could never have the discipline to do that.
Okay, I need to roll this for both of you. Following their wins on Tuesday, Trump and Clinton turned their attention not to their opponents, but to each other. Watch.
The only card she has is the woman's card. She's got nothing else going. And frankly, if Hillary Clinton were a man, I don't think she'd get 5% of the vote.
Now, the other day, Mr. Trump accused me of playing the, quote, woman card. Well, if fighting for women's health care and paid family leave and equal pay is playing the woman card, then deal me in.
Oh, boy. Well, a little gravelly there at the finish. Is this a smart move for Trump to invoke the women's issue, considering how he's running with women?
I think he's trying to draw them out again on the woman's issue. We remember the last time that they went after Trump on the woman's issue. I mean, he strafed Bill Clinton so badly. I mean, I don't think he was in the offices of the Clinton Foundation for weeks after that. So it could play both ways. I mean, obviously, you can't do the whole campaign playing the woman card thing. But, I mean, Hillary had to come out and react to it. And, I mean, I don't know how popular Hillary is with women. I guess we'll see, but I know the last poll that just came out, Donald Trump is in a statistical tie right now with Hillary Clinton. And when the party starts unifying behind him, maybe except for David, I think people are going to make a choice between, what he offered in his foreign policy and the more Clinton, probably hawkish foreign policy.
How do you think they run against each other? How does this play out?
I think each is the other's dream opponent. And it's a symbiote. And we saw that. I mean, now when you ask the question, why did Donald Trump do this or that thing? I mean, he's often doing it because it's his nature. That there isn't always a strategic plan. But in this case, there is something about women opponents who really get under his skin. That was true with Carly Fiorina. That's true with others. And he goes after them in a more savage way than he does even with his male opponents. And in Hillary Clinton's case, she is trying to reignite the Obama coalition that is going to be less excited about her. The most troubling strategic fact for Democrats about this election was that between 2008 and 2012, President Obama's vote dropped by about 3.7 million. There's only about a 900,000 pickup on the Republican side. 2.6 million votes disappeared. It would have been even worse for President Obama, but for this huge last-minute surge of older black voters. Black voters came out in even greater numbers for him in 2012 than in 2008.
Will they stay for Hillary?
And that, of course not. Of course not, because the voters he got, I mean, Obama had a fantastic turnout of black voters in 2008. In 2012, people were coming in with their IV drip units. I mean, these were people who, by the way, I want to say, I completely commend this. This is loyalty. I mean, this is you kept faith with us,
or you get my double helping of mashed potatoes at lunch.
You're keeping, we keep faith with you. You keep faith with us. So I applaud this. But the fact is, it was a heroic search. The black voter turnout in 2012 was higher than white voter turnout for the only time in American history.
And there has been also the turnout we're seeing in these primaries.
The Republican turnout is historic.
Yeah,
it's the biggest leap ever. Everyone can talk about, well, this is horrible. Well, last time I checked, this is what you want. You want huge crowds to show up in stadiums. You want people to be excited. You want people to tell their friends. You want people to be more engaged on the issues. And you want people not to listen, frankly, to every talking head they see on television and think for themselves. I think a lot of people are, frankly, thinking for themselves this time around. And Donald Trump isn't perfect. Donald Trump has lots of issues. We all do. But I think people have looked at the last, 15 years of American economic and foreign policy, and they've had quite enough.
And the last 17 Republican possibilities.
Yeah, they're saying no to Obama's economic policy. They're saying no to George Bush's foreign policy, and frankly, a lot of his economic policy. And Trump laid waste to that.
I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that later, David. That's coming.
I'm not going to disagree with that much of that.
Okay, well, we'll get into that because that's the foreign policy in Trump's speech, which I want to talk about. The day after Trump's victory, Ted Cruz, talking about somebody thinking for themselves, seeking to break the Trump stranglehold on the media and to resurrect his sagging campaign, announced that Carly Fiorina would be his running mate, should he secure the nomination. Now, this sounds to me a little bit like announcing the designer of the wedding dress before you propose to the girl. But, I mean, does this help him at all?
Well, Laura a minute ago was saying we shouldn't listen to the egghead elitists. And the thing is, if you listen to the egghead elitist political scientists, they will tell you no vice presidential choice in history has ever made a difference at all. And guess what? On this one, they were right. Yeah. Of course, it doesn't help. It didn't help. It didn't help Walter Mondale when he chose Geraldine Ferraro. It didn't help John McCain to pick Sarah Palin.
Yeah, but they did that after they got the nomination. Only Reagan pulled this one, and he lost.
It didn't help Reagan with Richard Schweiker. It's not a technique that works. It is not as exciting to the voters as it is to the commentariat.
Laura, I want to play this for you, and I want your reaction to
Lloyd
this
Benson really moved.
Lloyd Benson was your guy. This is Carly Fiorina. She wasted, stop it. She wasted no time emphasizing not only who she and Ted were running against, but that there is more at stake than just who wins the Republican nomination.
Ted Cruz could not be more right in what he said. There is a lot at stake, and in fact, this is a fight. This is a fight for the soul of our party and the future of our nation. You know, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, they are two sides of the same coin. They're both liberal, we know that. But, Hillary Clinton, like so many politicians, Hillary Clinton has made her millions selling access and influence from inside the system. And Donald Trump has made his billions buying people like Hillary Clinton.
Does this play, Laura Ingraham, does this help work Trump's greatest weakness, which is his 69% deficit with female voters?
I don't think so. Carly Fiorina ran against Barbara Boxer in California and came out of that race in 2010, which was a Republican year. And California is a tough state, no doubt. But she came away with a 1 million vote deficit. Now, I think she's gotten better than that Senate race. She's a lot better. But the fact of that matter is, while she was, I think, a fine debater, and she's a smart woman, the thing that she's known for is the thing that's playing really badly right now. I mean, Manafort came on my radio show today and said she's the queen of outsourcing. I mean, that's just... and she has a good defense to what they're saying about the HP job loss as a compact deal with that. But when your one thing that you're known for is being a female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and that tenure did not end, at least on the surface. And I know there's a deeper story there. That's difficult. Trump's had his own, business problems. We all know that, and they're going to make a lot of hay out of that. But I think David's right. This looks like we're going to hurry up so you all get ready for us. And she didn't have any delegates. She didn't win any delegates.
Yeah, she couldn't break out of her own pack in this race. But you had the picture of them both wave. It looks like they're accepting the nomination, David. I guess that was the point.
That's the point. And to look like this is a real thing that could really happen, as opposed to this strange thing that is the Trump campaign, which every day something happens there that is just jaw-dropping jaw-droppingly unbelievable. You know, the foreign policy speech which Laura attended, which had the Russian ambassador in a more honored place than the ambassador from any of America's allies and friends, that's a strange thing.
Unpredictable.
That's unpredictable.
Building bridges.
But that line you quoted, I think, is a key to what is going wrong here. When Carly Fiorina described Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton as both liberals, what is going on is that the political categories that we have become used to over 30 years are dissolving in front of our eyes. And Donald Trump has given everyone fair warning. He's going to adopt a lot of the Bernie Sanders economic message. And I don't know that it's going to make sense to talk about what is about to happen using language that was developed to describe the elections of 1976 and 1980 and 1984.
Well, yeah. Well, I think
I mean, the foreign policy speech was unconventional. On the one hand, he's very aggressive, Laura. On the other hand,
I disagree with that. I mean, I think it's actually much more Reagan-esque, and I think Craig Shirley, Reagan biographer, agrees with this. It's much more Reagan-esque than Bush-like. I mean, his foreign policy, when Bush came in, and David remembers this, he wrote a book about it. I'm going to have a humble foreign policy. Obviously, 9/11 happened, a lot happened, but the last thing you would ever describe George W. Bush's foreign policy is humble. And I think that the reality is right now, America has seen 15 years of globalization, massive trade deals, seemingly unending foreign intervention in the Middle East, and they see chaos on the economic home front with no GDP to speak of. They see a foreign policy in total disarray, and Trump says, this hasn't worked. I'm going to do something that's America-centered, America-focused. We're going to rebuild our military. I think it's much more peace through strength than it is, you know, let's
he said it's America first, David, and that this is time to worry about the homeland first. What's wrong with that?
He said a number of things. The thing that I found sort of exemplified what I thought was glaring about the speech was he has a paragraph in which he says, we're going to demand that our allies spend more. And if they don't, we're not going to defend them. And then in the very next paragraph, he said our allies no longer think of us as reliable. Well, maybe that's because of the thing you said in your very last paragraph, if you can remember that far back. What he's talking about here, here's where it is not Reagan-esque. Reagan had moments that were like this. Trump is talking about dissolving the global security structure that has worked since 1945. And while he's attacking a lot of things that are clearly not working, Laura and I, you know, I think have often welcomed his creative effect on the immigration debate, which was not a debate until he made it a debate. Good for him on that one. And he put the issue of wages into the center of the political discussion. Good for him. And he also is, to my delight, I'm not sure how Laura feels about this, he's shown Republicans they cannot have the Ryan approach to health care coverage that that Americans need more health care security than they've got, and government is going to have to be involved in providing that. But when you're talking about dissolving the global structure of democracy and peace that has worked since the end of World War II, that is a very frightening thing.
He didn't say dissolve it, though. He said pay 3% of your GDP, devote 3% of your GDP to defense. How is that dissolving the global structure? It's like we can't pay for everybody.
I'm going to let him speak for himself. Here's a little bite of Donald Trump. His first public policy speech, reading from a prompter at the Mayflower Hotel. Laura, you were there. I want to get your reaction. Roll that.
My foreign policy will always put the interests of the American people and American security above all else. Has to be first. Has to be. That will be the foundation of every single decision that I will make. America first will be the major and overriding theme of my administration. Secondly, our allies are not paying their fair share, and I've been talking about this recently a lot. Our allies must contribute toward their financial, political, and human costs, have to do it, of our tremendous security burden. But many of them are simply not doing so.
He talked about defeating ISIS. He talked about working with countries like China and Russia. David, as you said, Russia had an exalted place there. Seems to be trying to indicate the message of the talk. What's wrong with this? Is it breaking orthodoxy? You have Lindsey Graham and others saying Ronald Reagan spinning in his grave.
Yeah, well, when's the last time Lindsey Graham was right about, I'm sorry, but most foreign policy issues Lindsey Graham's been involved with, he's gotten horrifically wrong. And Donald Trump's saying, we are $19 trillion in debt. That is a reality. That is not some just ephemeral number. That's real. We cannot allow the world to freeload or free ride on our goodwill. We love our allies, but they've got to contribute a little bit, just a little bit of their GDP. And if they don't do that, then we have to make some decisions for ourselves. I mean, we want to do things, whether it's health care or care for the elderly or the indigent. We want to be able to take care of the home front. Infrastructure is crumbling in this country, and we need to spend money on that. It's not dissolving the alliances. I don't think he wants to do that, but he wants to do it smarter.
David,
whether he can do it or not,
he
we'll
savaged
see.
both Obama's foreign policy as well as George W. Bush's. Doesn't that put him as the ultimate outsider? Doesn't that draw the independents and the disaffected people in both parties?
Yeah, but sometimes you can be an outsider because you're saying something really reckless, dangerous, and uninformed. And I want to put my finger on this Russia matter. Right now, there's a shooting war going on the European continent, in Ukraine. About 8,000 people dead, unknown numbers of others wounded. Ukraine is not an ally of the United States, but it is an emerging democracy. It's a country to which the United States has made very specific guarantees in return for its surrender of its nuclear weapons. It's an associate member of the European Union. The Russians are fighting a violent war there, and they are penetrating political systems all across the developed world. We know that there is a loan of tens of millions of dollars from a Russian state-owned bank to the National Front in France. They penetrate other political systems in the same way, and it's going on here. And it is very disturbing to me that people who have had senior positions with pro-Putin friends in Russia and in the former Soviet states have incredibly senior roles in the Trump campaign. That is disturbing.
He spent a piece of his foreign policy speech talking about the genocide of Christians in the Middle East, something that it took the Obama administration many years to admit. They only just did so recently. Watch this clip. I want to see how you think this plays and to whom he's addressing this.
We've made the Middle East more unstable and chaotic than ever before. We left Christians subject to intense persecution and even genocide. We have done nothing to help the Christians, nothing. And we should always be ashamed for that lack of action.
What was the reaction in the room to that? Who's he playing to?
Yeah, well, I think he's playing to religious voters. I mean, the word shame there stood out to me. We should always be ashamed of that. There was like a gut punch, I think, to this administration, but also I think just to all of us who feel like this is all going on. And what are we doing to help these people? We're bringing in all these refugees into the United States. Obama increased the number. And as far as I can tell, like 93% are Muslim or 98% are Muslim, something like that. I mean, should we take any of the Christians in? And if not, why not? Well, I mean, these people are actually going to be completely obliterated from their ancestral homelands. The Nineveh Plain, which our friend Christopher Hitchens wrote about so eloquently and beautifully when he was still alive. I mean, they've all been scattered from there and oppressed, and it's disgusting.
The refugee process begins by showing up at a UN center to be tallied and registered. Those centers are places where Christian refugees are often afraid to go.
Right.
And so they don't enter the mouth of the pipeline, so they don't even get considered for refugee status in any of the programs, especially not the American one, and that's a real shame. But Trump, in that speech, made a transition from something that he started saying something that was really false and outrageous, which is that it's the United States' fault that Christians are being persecuted in the Middle East? No. Is it true that the United States hasn't done much to help?
Right.
Yes. But the first statement, which is the more powerful one, that's false. And
which is what?
Which is that it is America that set in motion the persecution of the Christians of the Middle East.
Well, he would say that the Iraq policy and George W. Bush's decision to go in destabilized the region and did wipe out these native populations that had been there for centuries. That's true. It's not true.
Why not? If we hadn't gone into Iraq, the Christians would still be living there.
Because it started 30 years earlier. That's why it's not true. Because what has been happening is with the rise of a specifically Islamic consciousness in the Arab countries, that you've seen Christian communities persecuted in Lebanon, you've seen them persecuted in Egypt, you've seen them persecuted in Turkey.
I know they were held back in places like Iraq because of Saddam Hussein, who had them in his upper echelons.
But there was a slow motion. There was a slow motion drive to expulsion. They were not being violently attacked, but they were leaving and exiting. They had better opportunities to exit. That was true in Syria as well. So yeah, the Iraq.
So we didn't destabilize Iraq?
No, the Iraq War accelerated a lot of things that were happening anyway, both for good and for bad. But to put this on the United States, and that is one of the things that is very characteristic about the way Donald Trump talks about He makes an indictment of American foreign policy always. He doesn't just, when he speaks about America first, in some ways it's also America most negatively. And it bothers me that so much of what he says on these subjects is the same thing as you hear on RT's propaganda.
Laura, quickly.
I think one of the things he said that was interesting regarding China, we didn't talk about China, he said in future trade deals, he said we can work with the Chinese, but when we come together for a deal, it's got to be mutually beneficial to both countries, or we'll have to go our separate ways. And I'm sorry, but it's about time someone said that with what's going on with our relationship with China.
We'll see how this all plays out. Here's my final question. Where do you see this ending? When does Bernie Sanders get out, and how long does it take John Kasich to do the same? Should he? Is it time?
He probably should have gotten out a long time ago and rallied to the only non-Trump alternative that was going to work. Bernie Sanders, I think, stays until California. He is trying to maximize his influence and also trying to lock the exit so that Hillary Clinton cannot pivot to the center. She's going to see, if Donald Trump is the nominee, a massive opportunity to win traditional Republican voters, people who live in suburbs, who are economically secure, and Bernie Sanders wants to stop her from doing that.
Laura?
Well, I think there are a lot of Republicans who are going to, think they can cut deals with Hillary on foreign policy, trade, and immigration, and they'll try to do just that.
Do you see Republicans here in D.C. coming around to Donald Trump after saying never Trump,
They're
never?
already coming around, Raymond. The calls are already being made, the appointments are already being had. A lot of people, they want influence, they want access, and they see this massive turnout of the American voters, and a lot of them are saying, well, we maybe have to do things a little bit differently from now on.
Very good. Laura Ingraham, David Frum, thank you both for being
here.
No
heroes in Washington, D.C.
There never are. Don't forget to check out The Laura Ingraham Show. Deets are at lauraingraham.com, and you can find Life Explained, from parenting to health to pop culture, at lifezet.com. And David Frum's analysis and columns can be found at theatlantic.com. Thanks again. When we return, Boko Haram continues to ravage the African nation of Nigeria, particularly the Christian and minority populations. What can be done? Bishop Matthew Kukaah of Nigeria joins us when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. As we reported earlier, civilian casualties at the hands of Boko Haram suicide bombers in Nigeria is rising in that African nation. Christians there are suffering in a particular way, but where's the Nigerian government in all of this, and why are they doing so little to curtail the violence? My next guest is the Bishop of Sokoto in northern Nigeria, and he is here to share with us the latest from the region. Please welcome Bishop Matthew Kukaah. Bishop, thank you for coming and for being here. What a pleasure. And
thank you.
We were talking during the break. I am always so amazed when I travel to Rome or when I'm in New York and I see so many Nigerian priests and seminarians who come up and say, I watch you in Nigeria, I watch EWTN. It's amazing, just the reach and how that family of faith extends even to places we may have never visited.
EWTN is really big in Nigeria. It's really big. And as I told you, your handsome looks have helped you.
Oh, well, if
so you're very popular in Nigeria.
Thank goodness the people in Nigeria have very bad eyesight. Good. I'm glad to hear it. I want to talk about something serious. Boko Haram, which has been such a scourge. It emerged in 2003 on your continent, but really in your diocese, in the northern part of Nigeria. What are the origins of Boko Haram? What are the forces that came together to create this extremist group, which translated means Western education is forbidden?
Well, thank you very much, for having me. The Boko Haram emerged. It actually did not emerge as a violent organization, and they were on the ground for quite some time. They didn't cause trouble to anybody. And what they did, I think what their leader simply did was what would happen everywhere else in the world, where poverty lives side by side with, extreme poverty lives side by side with wealth. And they were more or less a self-help organization, believing that, life ought to be much better. And but the leader became increasingly very influential, largely because he was doing some really simple things to meet the needs of ordinary Muslims. And of course, as you know, with all politicians who like a crowd, the politicians began to befriend him. And then, of course, in the process, he became very powerful. Then they fell out. The rest is history.
Right.
But that's really when Boko Haram took a different turn.
And became radicalized and started.
They became radicalized, but largely because, one, the way their leader was killed, he was killed in the most brutal manner. This was the time of the social media, so you know, people were able to see all this happen. And then the reaction of the security agencies didn't help matters. Then subsequently, more and more young people were arrested, never really tried, and internally people became increasingly radicalized. Then it became a law and order issue. And the federal government probably didn't really get the message. Then there was a time people thought, well, it was just Christian and Muslim. Increasingly, things got worse. But I think the climax actually came and coincided, you know, with the American invasion of Libya, right, and the killing of Gaddafi, who was a man of extraordinary influence in Africa. He pumped in over the last 20 or 30 years tons of money, you know, into Africa, and he was supporting different Islamic causes. So the death of Gaddafi was the death of a godfather, but also over and above that, there were quite a good number of African soldiers who had already, you know, people who had joined the Libyan army. So a lot of that with the weapons and so on and so forth really pumped up the volume of violence in Boko Haram.
And it continues. And the Christians are particularly targeted even at this hour, at this moment.
Right.
What are they doing, and why isn't the government doing more to rein them in? Or is the government part of the problem here?
Well, the government is part of the problem because it is the carelessness and the corruption of government that actually produce Boko Haram. I mean, when poverty and misery live side by side with wealth, and when you live in an extraordinarily wealthy country like Nigeria that has absolutely no business with poverty, then increasingly people begin to find, you know, new platforms for radicalization.
Right.
And what you call radicalization is always largely an effort by the weak to confront, you know, the very powerful state. So my view is that Boko Haram is actually the irresponsibility of those who govern Nigeria. And that the truth of the matter is that if the political elite don't fix the social and economic problems, you might close this chapter of Boko Haram, but something else worse might happen.
I was stunned to read an interview with you where you said there are more than 15 million kids on the streets of northern Nigeria.
Absolutely.
How do you combat this, and what are you proposing be done?
Well, it's a tough call, but this is as a result of the suspicion that ordinary Muslims have for, you know, to Western education. And this is largely historical. Right. But to answer your question directly, for us in the Diocese of Sokoto, and I think the Catholic Church everywhere, we are drawing from over 1,000 years of the Catholic Church's experience with education and the pursuit of the values of the common good.
How many schools do you have in northern Nigeria now?
No, within the Diocese of Sokoto, which is quite a huge expanse of land, about 107,000 square kilometers, 4 states of Nigeria, we have about 22 primary, secondary, and nursery schools. But of course, severely circumscribed by the fact that the government is reluctant to allocate land to, you know, to do.
They won't give you land to build on.
That has been our story, sadly. And the result, of course, is that most of our schools are not where they ought to be. They are within the premises of the church because we have to try and manage the little space we have. Our ambition, because our schools are performing, even amidst those difficulties, we're still posting the best results, you know, wherever we find ourselves.
The culture of Nigeria.
Yes, so we're hoping that if the government can cooperate with us and realize that going forward after Boko Haram, all hands have to be on deck. And that the Catholic Church is perhaps one of the best positioned institutions to respond to the social problems. And that through education, we can actually begin to build a new generation of young Nigerians who can think differently about each other, you know, as Christians
but
or
it's
Muslims.
got to be difficult. 50% of this population is Muslim, 40% Christian, 10% indigenous. How do you get that majority Muslim population to willingly come to your school? I know there are Muslim students now,
Well,
but there's got to be pressure on them not to do it, considering you've got Boko Haram blowing everybody up all around you.
Actually, the quality of our education is its own advertisement. You know, and it's a pretty long story, but to cut it short, as I said, we are posting the best results in the 4 states where we are as a diocese. And only last month, I had a meeting with one of the governors because happily, one of our schools, you know, we produced the best result in the state. I took the 2 kids who had the best results in the whole state. Incidentally, they were from our school. I took them to go and meet the governor. What was even the best news was the fact that they were all Muslims, you know, and we're using this kind of platform because I said to the governor, now see what we've done. We've brought honor and glory to the state. Should we not then be able to find a way of working together? And the governor there and then says, well, you know, in appreciation of what we are going to do, I said to him, give these kids a scholarship. He's agreed to give them a scholarship and agreed that somehow we can begin to partner in terms of getting access to land. And my argument is that you've not seen anything yet. If you give us the space, we will be able to do much more. You know, so I think that going forward, there are huge opportunities in Nigeria, especially because the violence of Boko Haram never really discriminated. So violence, I mean, Muslims have suffered in disproportionate numbers in terms of even their institutions, the number of people that they've lost. So this has actually offered us another opportunity to think a bit more creatively about how to manage ourselves as a country.
At the end, I'm going to tell people how they can help, because this is such an important effort. I know you are raising money now to try to build schools and acquire land. That's the big challenge. Now, I want to talk about you for one moment before I wrap up. You've said, now people should know, you were a Rhodes Scholar, you studied here in the United States. You said, my job, first of all, I'm an intellectual, and my job is to stir the hornet's nest, generating new ideas and pointing the way forward. How so?
This is the way Jesus showed us. You know, you don't end up on a cross by soft talk. And it's not about, it's about asking the government and asking our citizens to answer the difficult questions. We can't postpone the evil day. Nigeria is not where it ought to be now. And we are where we are because we've chosen too many soft options, which has left the country thoroughly disunited and unable to harmonize our resources. So my argument has always been there is enough, as Gandhi said, you know, to meet everybody's need. It may not be possible to meet everybody's greed, but we cannot have a peaceful society where inequalities continue to deepen.
Bishop Kukah, thank you so much
for
coming here. Great to meet you and to see you. And we will stay in touch. Let us know how this situation progresses. And we want to make sure that the eyes of the world continue to be on Africa. It's such an important. And what we didn't talk about is how the faith is growing there.
Absolutely.
Let's quickly, before I let you go, tell me about I've seen the vibrancy of faith up close. Tell me about the faith of the people in the midst of this tragedy.
Look, amidst all this, actually, if anything, we've actually been energized. You know, Islam preceded Christianity in Nigeria by over 800 years. Christianity has come relatively late, but it's making tremendous progress. And my message to Christians is, look, I mean, suffering is in our DNA, and it should only energize and help us to focus further. So, I mean, this is one of the best times for Christianity in Nigeria, despite the difficulties. Because, as St. Paul said, you know, our trials bring us hope, and this hope does not disappoint us.
Well, thank you for bringing hope to your people and to us.
Thank you.
Bishop Kukah's efforts, you can aid by going to Aid to the Church in Need. Their website is churchinneed.org. Thank you for being here again. When we return, Pope Francis famously once asked Christians to leave their comfort zones and bring the gospel to those most in need. My next guest has a unique perspective on what that means. Stay tuned. He has a new book. He's a Jesuit, and it explores what Pope Francis would do. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest is a former newspaper reporter, not to mention a convert to Catholicism, now a Jesuit scholastic. What is this Jesuit Pope trying to tell us about spreading the gospel in this Jubilee year of mercy? Here to discuss his new book, What Would Pope Francis Do? Bringing the good news to people in need, and to give us a little insight into the mind of this very canny and unexpected Pope. Would you welcome Sean SALAI? Sean, great to see you.
Great to be here, Raymond. Thanks for having me.
You were teaching in a Jesuit high school, right, down in Florida, when Pope Francis was elected. Did you ever imagine we'd have a Jesuit Pope?
Oh, no idea. When the Pope was elected, I was teaching freshman boys. I told them the week before the election there will never be a Jesuit Pope. Some of the kids said, what if a Jesuit's Pope? I said, there's only one cardinal. Jesuits try to avoid honors in the church. There's never been one before. And then a week later, he walked out.
There he
was.
We
were just shocked and floored, and it was wonderful to be embarrassed like that.
Tell me, why do you think he remains an enigma and such a... People can't quite get a read on Pope Francis. They don't quite know where he's headed here. Why do you think that is? What is it about him as a Jesuit that perhaps we're missing?
Well, as a Jesuit, he speaks a language of the heart, a language of discernment, and it's not something that you can analyze and fit into intellectual categories too easily, because he prays before he does things. And he's also somebody who pays more attention to his sense of where God is leading the church than to what the media is concerned about.
And as you state in the book, it can sometimes, the Jesuits are sort of accustomed to going to places they didn't originally imagine.
Absolutely. St. Ignatius didn't expect to be the Jesuit general. Pope Francis, his resignation letter as a cardinal was on Pope Benedict's desk when he was elected. And it's just something that really is part of Jesuit life, is learning to accept that God may be calling you to something beyond yourself. And in this book, really, it's about Francis calling all of us to be a field hospital church in this year of mercy, to go out to people on the margins, whether they're elderly, whether they're homeless, whether they're in prisons. I work at San Quentin prison and talk about that in the book. Talk about Pope Francis visiting Rabibia prison.
Right.
And I'm really moved by Mother Angelica, who we're still mourning. And I don't have to tell you just the influence she had on so many people, including yourself. And at the same time went through tremendous suffering in her life.
She did.
In her younger life, and then just think of the last several years when she was receiving nursing care and a very hidden life. And Pope Francis talks about how our society kind of throws the elderly away. I think one quote in the book, he says, I've seen myself that the elderly are treated like trash in our society. And so it's a call to all of us, maybe not to be missionaries in the same way, but to reach out to people in our own communities, our own families. Mother Teresa said the poor are among us, even in the United States.
But before we run out of time, I want you to touch on something. One of the keys to this book, you use the joy of the gospel, which is Pope Francis's first encyclical, his independent encyclical. Or was it an exhortation?
Exhortation.
Exhortation. The joy of the gospel you use to understand his thought. What are the big themes you see there that perhaps the rest of the world and the average viewer are missing?
Well, we follow 6 themes: joy, longing, hope, dignity. I would just focus maybe on longing for a moment. The idea is that the starting point of our relationship with God is not our love for God, but God's love for us. And that once we experience that, we look at how we're being called and moved to respond to it.
And what else? What else? What are those other themes that you point out in the book? You mentioned dignity, closeness to others, weariness. Going out to the margins is never easy. Where did that come from for Francis?
Well, that came...
That understanding.
Sure. And it came from being a very busy pastor. You know, for me, I talk about my experience of teaching high school in the book and how wearying it is to get up at 7 in the morning every day and go all day and then go to events in the evening. And it's kind of like being a parent.
Well, or being a teacher. Teaching is, I've learned these past few weeks, there is probably nothing more exhausting because children and young people draw so much, they demand so much energy from you and creativity. It's draining. I mean, for old guys, it's really draining. So I've been speaking to hundreds of kids at schools, and it's, wow, it's refreshing, but it's also, it takes a lot of energy. What is the final, in the final analysis, what is it about Francis the Jesuit that helps to explain and encompass even the contradictions that we may be reporting from week to week? Like the exhortation a few weeks ago that, as you know, generated a lot of controversy, wanting to help those in difficult situations, even marriage situations, and also seemingly changing practice while leaving the doctrine in place. What explains that approach?
Really his life experience. It's his experience of being in prisons, hospitals, drug addiction rehab facilities, high schools. He was Mr. Bergoglio,
that's right,
teaching high school chemistry during his Jesuit training, just as I taught high school.
Wow.
And really it's all about sort of appreciating where people are and walking with them in their journey. It's not enough to just leave someone with the catechism, although the catechism is very important, and then leave them in the nursing home. But you really, people can look the catechism up online. What they want from the church a lot of times is that accompaniment and that kind of close contact.
Yeah, that witness and that friendship.
Yeah.
Sean, thank you so much for being here. What would Pope Francis do? Bringing the Good News to People in Need by Sean SALAI is available at bookstores everywhere and online. That is all the time we have. I want to remind you, the final chapter of Mother Angelica's incredible story hits bookstores on May 17th. If you can pre-order it, you might get some great deals out there. Mother Angelica, Her Grand Silence, The Last Years and Living Legacy is available now from the EWTN Religious Catalog, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever great books are sold. Don't miss this moving final installment of the Mother Angelica collection. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. And don't miss our show next week. We'll talk politics with former RNC Chairman Michael Steele. Oh, and I have a few surprises. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for being here. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.